Greetings, family, friends, and frenemies. Greetings, family, friends, and frenemies. Greetings, family, friends, and frenemies. I don't mind that having been repeated a few times. Emphasis on frenemies. Funny, genuinely, and serious. Okay, this is the Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer program for Saturday, July 20th, 2019. I feel a sadness that I hope can be resolved by the way history plays out. I don't want to be proven correct by history. I don't want to be correct. I want things corrected. It came to me last night what could be happening with the ADOS movement and what there are strong indicators is happening with it as a genocidal instrument. I really never thought about it before last night. It came as a result of some interactions that I had with people in a Facebook group, and it was a Facebook group for ADOS people, ADOS 101 or something like that. I'm a member of the group. I was added by the moderator of this YouTube channel, Kofi. And I read around and reacted to some people's posts and got to see what their reactions were. And in the process of that, I became aware that even, not that this ground hasn't been covered to some extent, but that even Dr. William, colloquially known as Sandy Darity, the most esteemed provider of data from the ivory tower at Duke University, professor of economics at Duke. Prior to that, he was at Chapel Hill. I'm very familiar with Dr. Darity's work, as I've said many times, because I have interviewed him. I've had a few email exchanges with him. This was long before, by many years, the Breaking Brown channel was ever established and the ADOS hashtag ever established. And I'm a big admirer, have been a big admirer of his work. But when I saw, take a swallow. When I saw, it's emotional, when I saw him doubling down on social media with a tweet, discounting and really urging strongly, using the words absolutely, no inclusion of a phenotype as being a requirement for receipt of any reparations as a Native Black American. I was very disappointed. I knew that was his position because we had agreed to disagree. We had agreed just not to engage each other on social media regarding it because he had blocked me at one time. And so, I emailed him to ask him why. And so as a result of that conversation, which I'm not going to share all the details of it, we just agreed to disagree. And then since that time, he's doubled down and said he went further with it. And for shock value, because sometimes you need shock to impress upon people the importance of a thing. I'm not going to preview what he said. I'm just going to let you see it for yourself. And so, of course, if he's saying this, lots and lots, I don't know what percentage, I'm guesstimating now, but I'm saying probably 80 to 90%, if not more, of the people who are in the ADOS movement agree with him. And it is shocking. So that's what this broadcast is going to be about. I never in my wildest dreams, up until last night, thought that that's what the ADOS movement could be about. I thought it could be a Hail Mary to try to get some sort of reparations. But I think they're very strong indicators that it's more than that. Now, I don't know what people, I honestly, in my heart, I actually do feel things. I don't just think things. I honestly, in my heart, do not believe that Dr. Darity is part of this movement in order to facilitate genocide of Black people in this part of the world. I do not know if there are other people who are the face of it, who are in it for that. It may just be something that they don't care about because they themselves are not Black. And why pull punches at this point? I'm not sure that Yvette Carnell is not in that camp. I suppose she may just simply be in the camp of people that I've talked about from the very earliest episodes. This channel is only about 4 months old. So I suspect that is more likely of what it is. But I do believe that there are non-Black people who have either planned this, facilitated, promoted it, encouraged it for the purposes of genocide of Black people in this part of the world, the United States of America. Oh yeah, I believe that. So let me just discuss and show the evidence. I've chosen for a thumbnail what we're all looking at now. There are versions of this, there are paintings of this in Brazil, but you see Grace Jones, and many people remember Grace Jones principally from the movie Boomerang. Boomerang, I mean, really, undeniably, unambiguously Black woman. You see her son with the locks in the back. I don't know if he's Black or not, because so a lot of times when people wear locks, you don't know what their hair texture is, and I didn't bother to do a whole lot of Googling, because the purpose of this was just to show how you can breed out Blackness. We know that was an official policy it was an official policy to breed out non-whiteness in Australia. Now, some of those people were, I wouldn't call them Black people, but they weren't white people, but also the policy applied to what was called the Torres Strait Islanders, and those were Black people. They had nappy, some of them still exist, have nappy hair, and I mean they would definitely score as Black on the algorithm I created. And someone took a not so low-key swipe at myself and Kofi, and I guess whoever else agrees with us that phenotype is the bottom line as to how to define. It is the only logical way to define who a Black person is. So somebody took not too low a swipe. What they did is they excerpted part of a video that Yvette Carnell did on her channel, and they subtitled it something about policing Blackness. Well, if you want to call me a police of Blackness, I'm proud to wear that badge. I wish somebody would do some art for me and create that badge. We all should be deputized, if we are black people, to be policing blackness. Because certainly people who are not black, even if they have an ancestor who was enslaved in the United States, should not be receiving reparations. They're sexual immigrants. And the data shows that immigrants by the second generation are doing just as well as white folks. So functionally, even though people want to argue with it, there are really only two races, black and non-black. But we're talking about reparations in the United States. I'm pro-reparations. But now I'm beginning, now I understand that being pro-reparations and being pro-ADOS movement are two different things. I'm not only pro-reparations, I'm pro-differentiating between some of the needs that black people in the United States have and needs that black people other places have. I've been very clear about that for many years. Yeah, I'm on board with reparations and that, the differentiation. Although I know that black people all over the world have many things in common. Like I said, I'm for federation of all the different black groups with a respect for the differences in our ways of doing things, in our languages, in our talents, and our specific needs. I've been on board with that, but now this ADOS movement thing is really troubling and sad to me as a real threat. So let me get into it. Got my little outline, so if you hear paper ruffling, I want to make sure I cover everything. Okay, so my little outline said that I was to introduce myself, which I did. I gotta have the outline because I'm off kilter. I'm emotionally ruffled. So I did that. Talked about the ADOS group. So what they're doing is they're signing off on this definition of blackness, which we've discussed before. So to qualify for reparations, there are what's on the table for them that they're all buying, and this is what Dr. Darity submitted and proposed. Even proposed it to he submitted a document to the congressional hearing to that effect. I'm going to show you all of this stuff. So what's on the table for them is that you're a black person if you just can show that you've been identifying yourself as black for 10 years. That's all. Doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter if people treat you as black, because they are going to treat you as black based on how you look. Doesn't matter whether or not you can show that you've had some harm. Doesn't matter if you can show that you have wealth or are building wealth on the level of non-black people because you are white, or certainly not black. I don't even want to say white. Just if you self-identify. Now, this could be taken to an extreme. And to my unbelievable surprise, they are embracing that extreme. I don't want to foreshadow you. You're going to be shocked, I hope. And of course, the other thing on the table is, so it's a two-pronged criteria. One is you just have to self-identify as black. Number two, you just have to prove that you have one ancestor. You got to document one ancestor that was enslaved. Just one. Just one. There's a problem with documenting, period. The vast majority of actual descendants of American slavery, I have said and I'm still saying, are not going to be able to document that. The people who are going to have the greatest ability to document it are going to be the people who are not black, because they have access to stuff. So you could have people who've been white for generations who can document one ancestor, and they're going to be eligible according to this two-pronged criteria. And you would think that if you would tell people that they would rethink it and change up their criteria. No, they double down. They double down on it. I mean, I just can't believe it. But you can see what happens here. I mean, you can breed it out, and they're okay with that. So they're okay with that little white baby and all of his or her descendants getting reparations. Whether that is newly registering as an ADOS or just through intergenerational wealth transfer, meaning inheriting it. They're okay with that. They sure are. Okay, so I want to define some things, and then I want to demonstrate some things. So you know how we do it here. There's a reason you saw Adam Clayton Powell there, because he's a version of it. But I want to just define something called assortative mating, which I tried to discuss with the people in the group yesterday. And I was trying to tell them why the current criteria, that two-pronged criteria of just simply self-identifying for 10 years was not going to be good enough. And so they asked me why, why this self-identification and having the one ancestor was not going to be good enough. And I told them, because it's going to be a significant problem the very first generation of receipt, because you're going to have all kinds of people like Mariah Carey. And they don't have to be famous. There's a lot of them. We know that there are a lot of them because we know that every year, if we know this from F.W. Sweet's work. And if you want to know who he is, just Google him. And if you want to know what he said about this, just, Google the white paper. Try to find the one with the least typos. We know that there are between 35 to 55,000 of these people who switch their racial identification from black to white every single generation. That's just the ones that go from black to white. But you don't have to be pink, white, Euro in order to be on that other side of the black, non-black divide, which is really what it's always been. And I've demonstrated that atom for item. I'm not going to go from the rudiments of what I've been discussing for 4 months on and on, but I know that there are new people to this venue. So I'll touch upon it a bit. So I was trying to explain to these people in the ADOS group that assortative mating will take place. So we'll have a problem the very first generation because of the numbers I just spoke about that are documented. So that's going to be a problem that's going to dilute what actual ADOS black and the only people who have inherited the caste and cost of slavery, you heard me say over and over again, are people who are phenotypically black. So that's going to be a problem from the first generation. But by the second to third generation, it's going to be absolutely genocidal. So this is what I told them. Why will it be genocidal? Because of assortative mating. So let's define assortative mating. You just put it into Google. This is what you get. Assortative mating, also referred to as positive assortative mating or homogamy, is a mating pattern and a form of sexual selection. It means that individuals with similar phenotypes mate with one another more frequently than would be expected under a random mating pattern. So in simple words, what does that mean? What that means is that these people who you'd have to be told are black, or who clearly are the type of people who do not get treated as black. All the research shows that even if they look like a hybrid, like a classic mulatto, who's a classic sort of mulatto type of person. Oh, I don't know. You just name one for me. Zendaya or something like that. That these people are going to be eligible for reparations. People who look like Rashida Jones are going to be eligible for reparations. Now, what's going to happen? Let's talk about the ones who look like that. They're not famous. Who look like that, and at this point, they're 19 years old, they're 18, they're 17, they're 15. I already see it now. And there are no reparations on the table for them to get. But you know what's going to happen when there's money on the table? They're going to mate with each other. They're going to continue to populate. They're not going to mate with black people. And then there are going to be white people who are going to be marrying into these family people who already identify as white, Mexican people, Japanese people, whatever. They're going to be marrying into these families, and their numbers are going to swell the ADOS registries. And all that wealth is going to be passed down to them. And so for the actual people who are being mistreated on the basis of phenotype, who have been mistreated on the basis of phenotype since the days of slavery, slavery did not create race anti-blackness, which is what I've heard Yvette and some of her minions say. That had it not been for slavery, there wouldn't be any such thing as black and white. It's slavery that created anti-blackness. This is just insanity. Slavery was the result of its day of global anti-blackness. There are different results of it, of anti-blackness in this part of the world and all over the world. But yeah, just let there be some money on the table. And then white people will be marrying into families, and they'll get all of those monies, and then the black people will become a small proportion of those receiving any monies, and it'll be completely diluted to where it will have no effect. It won't help us. We'll be right back where we started, because it's the same as just giving money to everybody. And these people in the group, these ADOS enthusiasts, don't care. In fact, I think they're happy about it. This is why I think it's genocidal. Because this was the policy in Australia. So let's look at the policy in Australia. Do I have it in the order that I want it? I do. So this is a little clip. It's fair use. It's just a little clip, and it's for educational purposes, so I'm okay with it. Let me make sure that everything is looking the way that it's supposed to look. Yep, it is. Okay. Here's a little clip from the movie Rabbit Proof Fence, which is a docudrama. It's got real history in it. Just a little clip on assortative mating as an official policy. In Australia, it was called the assimilation policy. So here we go. And then I'll show you a PDF on it later.
As you know, every Aborigine born in this state comes under my control. Notice, if you will, the half-caste child. And there are ever-increasing numbers of them. Now, what is to happen to them? Are we to allow the creation of an unwanted third race? Should the coloreds be encouraged to go back to the black? Or should they be advanced to white status and be absorbed in the white population? Now, time and again, I am asked by some white man, if I marry this colored person, will our children be black? And as Chief Protector of Aborigines, it is my responsibility to accept or reject those marriages. Here is the answer. 3 generations. Half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see, in the 3rd generation, or 3rd cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black color. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out. Now, we come to the Moore River Native Settlement. Ladies, most of you are familiar with our work here, the training of domestic servants and farm laborers. I would like to thank you for your continuing support.
It went a little bit longer than I wanted to make that point. That's exactly what they did. They implemented an official policy of genocide through sex. They admitted that it was already going on, but they wanted to accelerate it. This isn't something unique to Australia. I'm going over old ground again, but I'm doing it because it's in a new framework now that I understand what the perils are and what I think the intended perils are. Even if some people are not aware that they're being used for this. I don't think Dr. Darity is. I don't think that I can't speak for anybody else. I can't speak for anybody. I'm just telling you my opinion. Okay. I'm gonna retrace some ground because I've talked about this before, but it's just the part that applies here. So this was, I think, either the first or second video I did on this platform. And you can see it's near the end. And I was making a point about these one-droppers, about the kinds of policies that they advocate for Black people that are not in our interests, because their interests are not the same as ours, because they don't get treated like us. I'm not saying there aren't allies in non-Black people, whether they be one-droppers or whether or not they be, have no known ancestry that are Black. But we don't live our lives by the exception. What I can say, and what I have said before, what I said on this particular video, is that the history of these types of people have led us in the wrong direction. And I see that happening here because a lot of the people in that ADOS group themselves are one-droppers. They have children who are one-droppers. I'm an exception. I have a child who's a one-dropper. But I wouldn't dare. I have nephews that I raised like my children. I wouldn't dare, and they're aware of the fact that I wouldn't dare advocate for them. I would advocate very strongly that they receive against them receiving any kind of reparations. But that's not the case for most people. Okay, and so I made this point in the very first video or the second video here, and I'm showing you these look at him. This is a person we were told is a Black person. But I made my point better in the, as I was speaking in the video, so I'll just play this to make the point again. Some of you have seen this already.
You young people probably do not recognize who this is, but this is Adam Clayton Powell, and he was supposedly like the first Black congressman. Okay? Does that look like a Black man to you? And, he presided during a time in which the primary emphasis was in opening the doors to white institutions for Black people. And that, it's a lot of the legislation. It's a lot of the work. And I will say at the start, because this is going to be a preview to the actual history of how that happened and how it was shepherded by non-Black people who were $5 Negroes. If you happen to look like this, if you happen to be, a person who's not Black but who's self-identifying as Black, it's going to be to your advantage. Your mind is going to naturally go to the place of, I want to be let into the white institutions, because the likelihood of it is that you will be. It's a mere formality. But if you're an unambiguously Black person, that probably is not where your mind is going to go. Your mind is probably going to go, I am treated so differently. And what I really want is to be left alone, to develop on my own. I want you to stop interfering. I want you to stop bombing me. I want to be able to defend myself against your bombing, against your poisoning. I want equal facilities. That's separate but equal stuff that you have in the books. That's fine with me if it's equal. Okay? That's what we want. If you're an unambiguously Black person, you're probably not looking forward to spending a lot of time around people who have an innate hostility towards you. But if you are looking like this, you're not going to have those kind of reservations. Let's go to the next one. This woman, this is modern. So her name is Elaine Winterroth. She was the editor for Essence magazine for beauty and fashion. So she was making decisions as to what should be considered beautiful and fashionable for Black women. I have a problem with that. I think we all should. Because What is your mental framework and orientation going to be if you look like that? When you have a decision as to whether or not to include black women with natural hairstyles without having to, yank, pop, crackle, pop, with the comb through your hair to get it, are you going to be making those decisions? Are you going to be is it going to be first in your mind to make sure that you have brown to dark skinned women, or the women who are most typical of
modest and
black
helpful,
people in
and generally not
in that
inclined
magazine?
to be
Should
immodest.
she have been in the position of editor of fashion and beauty in Essence magazine? I don't think so.
What my horoscope said
Next
today,
slide.
so I feel better about it.
My goodness. This was the president, the national president of the NAACP. Again, we're going to probably be knocking on doors and complaining about the status of our children in schools that are operated by white folks, instead of realizing that we're probably better off doing our own thing and wanting to make sure that within our schools we are taking care of the special needs of black children who've been traumatized in their families of origin because of the economic circumstances of anti-blackness. Okay, we're going to want to protect them from the assaults of these anti-black white teachers and principals, and all, the fact that they get suspended and disciplined more often. They don't learn about themselves. But if you look like this, you're probably just going to want to be included because you're very close, and it's just a formality. This is Benjamin Jealous, former national president of the NAACP. I don't know about Booker T. Washington. That he was on one knee, and there are people. It happens when we don't have a crisp definition of what a black person is. Okay, you don't want your
So I just stopped it there to make my point that a point that I had made before, and then that's enough. Okay, now let's get to what's happening right now. This is like hot off the press as of yesterday. I mean, he probably did it before that, but I didn't become aware of how extreme this thing had become until yesterday when I was in that group. Okay, so still on that, so that's good. Just I'm gonna show you how extreme this thing has gotten. This is just a reminder of what that Professor Boas said in 1910. This is the New York Times in 1910. You've seen this before. Professor Boas, who was out of Columbia University, predicts race amalgamation, which is the same thing with rabbit-proof fence that I just showed you in that movie. And he said it may be retarded by legislation but cannot be avoided. He tells Negroes he means Negro elimination. Union of white fathers and black mothers will bring this about. Danger and reverse conditions. This is a white man talking. If it were a white woman, it might be something different. But the policy is the same. He was advocating this 110 years ago, and this ADOS movement I'm now seeing is headed in that direction. First of all, we were already getting there because you can see that every generation the black population has a greater and greater proportion of these people who no longer look black. They look hybridized. If you look at the NBA, probably 20 to 30% of those people, of those guys, are not black. That goes along with even Dr. Darity's finding that in employment, skin color, and of course, skin color is a proxy for all kinds of physical characteristics. It's just a proxy because while it is not true that every person with light skin also has loose hair and a narrow nose and so on, they're far more likely to. So skin color is just a proxy. And even his is a proxy for a non-black phenotype. And Dr. Darity's own research shows that people who I self-identify as black, but who do not look black, are not treated as black, do not have the same economic outcomes. His own research says that. You hear some passion in my voice because I cannot believe what I saw him write, both submitted to Congress and what he put on social media. I am grieving my admiration for this man because I don't admire that many black males. And he worked so hard and did such rigorous work. I had such admiration for him. And it's not happy. It's not a happy thing for me to have lost my admiration for him. But you know what? The system of anti-blackness, it breaks people. And if you toil a really long time in the wilderness without any recognition for your talents, without any recognition for your hard work, you can get broken. I mean, he's in his early 60s, mid 60s by now. And so I have some empathy, but it's mixed with anger and outrage. But that's stopping there. It's stopping where we're going. Okay, so since we're talking about Darity, I've got him lined up here. Let's go here. This came from the testimony that Dr. Darity submitted to the most recent congressional hearing on the study of reparations for the American descendant of slaveries. H.R. 40, of course, talks about people of African descent, not just Native Black Americans. But you know that there was that hearing. It was a dog and pony show. I think Danny Glover was there. Dr. Darity did not make a personal appearance. My understanding is that he was at a previous commitment with Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore, something called the Angela Project, which I believe is, some sort of project that occurs every year, a conference in which white Christians supposedly try to show the Christian doctrine or faith in action by opposing racism. And Dr. Darity, as I understand it, I haven't gotten it confirmed, had already committed to attending that. So he did not make his personal appearance at the congressional hearing. But he did submit a document into the record. I watched the proceedings and I watched when it was submitted into the record. And it's a document of some length, but I have highlighted the applicable parts that this broadcast is about, and then I will show you the name of the document and prove to you that's where it's from, so if you want to look it up yourself. So Dr. Darity is saying that for reparations, you can look at it right from the very beginning. I think you can see my cursor where it starts. The first criterion will require genealogical documentation, but absolutely no phenotype. Do you see how he prefaced it? Absolutely. But absolutely no phenotype. In other words, it doesn't matter what you look like. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're a black person. I just can't believe it. This is my third time saying it. This is what he submitted to Congress. But absolutely no phenotype. Then he says ideology, and I don't know if he's trying to conflate the two, or DNA tests. I'm okay with the latter two, because DNA tests are very problematic for individual ancestry, not for large groups, but for individual ancestry. But he said absolutely no phenotype. This is what he wrote to me also in the emails. And you're going to be able to see him say that. I believe I have that queued up where he actually said it. I may not have that queued up. I may not. If I have time, I'll look for it where he rules it out. But you can see where he submitted this to Congress. Absolutely no phenotype. I can't believe it. And then he says the second criterion will require presentation of a suitable state or federal legal document. Suitable. The devil's in the details. What's suitable? Who gets to determine what's suitable? Of a state or federal legal document that the person declared themselves to be black. You know the extreme of this, right? The most extreme example, of course, we think it would be a joke. So we think we can show them, hey, well, what about Rachel Dolezal? Folks, hold on to your hat. Let's leave that right there. Just hold on to your hat. Because she certainly has identified for more than 10 years. And then he goes on to say these criteria rule out blacks who are post-slavery immigrants to the United States, whose own ancestors are likely to have been subjected to enslavement and colonialism elsewhere. Indeed, they have substantial claims for reparations themselves, but not from the United States government. And even that's not true. And, he really does great research, but he's wrong on that, because the United States governments, or the colonists, were doing slave breaking and bringing black people back and forth between the islands and the mainland during that whole colonial period. And even after the United States established its independence, the United States government was complicit in that. They were going back and forth. In addition to that, you have Puerto Rico, who's the United States territory right now, and has been, I don't know for how long, I've forgotten that. But there are black people there who endured slavery. So he's wrong on that account too. And then thirdly, which has already been discussed, the bill is supposed to account for, and he even said himself out of his own mouth, more than just in that same clip that talks about no phenotype. He even said, it's more important that we account for all of the harm that's been done to black people by virtue of Jim Crow and redlining and all the rest of it. And certainly a black person who came after 1865 endured that. So this is a very intelligent, logical man. He's a mathematician. He's a logician. He thinks deeply about things. What happened to you, Dr. Darity? What happened? And so I signed on. I think there was it the last program I did, or no, Kofi did one, and someone said, you got all these people who are running for president and they're proposing stuff and it's going to affect people long after they're dead. Well, of course, that happens with all policy makers. And so this person proposed that nobody under the age of 60 should be able to run for president. That's probably a pretty good rule. And that's probably going to apply to me at this point. And I'm not an ageist. And I've said before that I think youth is overblown in terms of its advantages, and I think black people overestimate the value of having more years, more experience. There are disadvantages and advantages on both sides. Younger people have more energy, but they tend to a lot of people think of it as courage, but a lot of times it's just them not understanding the risks. It's not courage if you don't understand the risk. And the younger you are, the less likely you are to understand the risk. Older people can be more prudent, but sometimes it's not prudence, it's just cowardice. So you've got cowardice being conflated with prudence at older ages, and you've got courage being conflated with just immaturity on the other end. But in the main, there comes a time when a person is mature enough to make certain decisions. And there comes a time when a person is too old to be making decisions. There are exceptions on both ends. But we're talking about the general rule. And frankly, part of what you hear, if you hear it at all, sometimes I think people can hear things and they can't, is, I said that I would stick with this YouTube platform because it's a unique platform, and I don't expect huge numbers, but I said I would stick with it until the end of October. If I had 500 subs by then, I would stick to it. But quite frankly, what you hear from me is just a sadness that I feel like, that I've never been compensated for this work, and I've, not monetarily. It's never been, I know that's not what you do. You don't get compensated, but I feel like, my energy is wearing thin. And I feel like it's about time for me to retire. But I'm so sad because I don't think there are enough younger people who understand and have the courage to protect their generation and the generations to come. And when you see people like Dr. Darity, who are so esteemed, saying this type of thing, just give me a second. Okay. Next PDF. So this goes along. This is an official sort of, I don't know if it's an official document, but this goes along with the clip from the movie that I showed. And they were talking about the Aboriginal problem. And you can see it highlighted. And so it says, in the first half of the 20th century, it was commonly thought that that Indigenous people in Australia would inevitably die out. However, the growing population of quote-unquote half-castes, meaning what we call mixed people here, a term now considered derogatory for those people of indigenous and white parentage, soon made it clear that the Aboriginal problem was not going to disappear. The government's solution was to discontinue its policy of protection, which separated Indigenous people from white society. In other words, to discontinue the segregation. Is this starting to make its impact? Are you getting it? Are you seeing its application to this part of the world? Which separated Indigenous people from white society by placing them on reserves and missions, and to instead adopt an assimilationist approach. Assimilation policy proposed that full-blood Indigenous people should be allowed to die out. Do you see, when you look at all the black people who are homeless on the street, they're always unambiguously black people, usually the very darkest ones with the most Africoid or Negroid features. They're not allowed to get anything. Yes, we're dying out. The lighter skinned, more mixed looking people, even, are prospering. What used to be brown skin when I was in my 20s and 30s is now considered dark skinned. So it's already, so being allowed to die out, and you promote these other people. And then of course you promote that these half castes or these mixed people procreate with each other and with white folks. And these are the people who are going to be getting the lion's share of the reparations, which mean they're just going to be getting more money than they already have. And the actual black people are going to be still the black people. They're not going to get anything. It's going to be diluted to nothing. So it's going to be a continuation of them dying on the vine or on the streets, on Skid Row, in whatever city. This is what this policy of not having a phenotype requirement is going to lead to real fast. I've already shown this one here, the elimination of the Negro. They're doing it. And we got people signing on to it. This is what this ADOS movement has come to, and I'm going to prove that too, because they're okay with it. Now, what I want to show is that this has been going on since time immemorial. This is why, a big reason why I say and agree with Kofi that there are only two races, black and non-black. Because remember, from all the anthropological evidence, everybody on the planet was at one point black. Everybody, whether that was Asia, Northeast Asia, South Asia, Europe, the Americas, the Middle East. But that's not the case anymore. So something happened. Here's an article about the Chinese roots. They say in Africa, but black people. I've highlighted it. Did I even show you Darity's testimony? And let me go back because I want to prove things. Make sure that you understand that this is a real document that he submitted. You could look it up yourself. Testimony concerning H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act. The 116th Congress, 2019-20 20. And you could see they describe William Darity. Okay, now let's go back to China. He was like, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? Give me a chance. Okay, so this was written, about 20 years ago? Most of the population of it was a Time science writer. Most of the population of modern China, 1/5 of all people living today, owes its genetic heritage, its genetic origins to Africa. I'm a little off today, huh? An international scientific team said today in research that undercuts any claim that modern humans may have originated independently in China. I don't think I have anything else that I highlighted there. I might just make sure. You see that the study finding is not disputed. Here we go. So they want to say that people developed independently, that they didn't just descend from black people. But the research, what they're saying is that they pretty much have to abandon that. So this is this last thing out of Africa into China. The genetics community in China is in favor of the idea of an independent origin of people of China. They don't want to believe they came from black people, said Jan at the Human Genetics Center in Houston. But these latest findings that they did with the DNA is another confirmation of African origin. Again, this is of big population groups, not of individual ancestry. And I don't think that I highlighted anything else. Okay, now, let's see what happened to the black people who were in China. And so this will be a demonstration of probably what happened to black people all over the world and what is happening now with the ADOS movement being a catalyst for it here in the United States, as predicted by Professor Boas in 1910, that you saw in that 1910 New York Times article. Let's show where it comes from first. In Taipei Times, in honor of the little black people. I'm not sure how you pronounce this. The Sayasat tribe of Henshu and Mialu will perform a solemn rite this weekend to commemorate a race of people they exterminated. Remember, black, non-black, not white, non-white. That's the paradigm. So the part that I highlighted goes right to, I hope, the point. The story goes that the little black people taught the Saisayat to farm by providing seeds, and they used to party together. Does this not sound like Native Americans, most of whom were black people, when the European ships arrived? We freely showed them how to farm here in the Americas. I'll go on. But one day the little black people sexually sexually harassed some Aboriginal women. Does that sound familiar? So the Sayat took revenge and killed them off by cutting a bridge over which they were all crossing. Just 2 little black people survived. Before departing eastward, they taught the Sayat about their culture and passed down some of their songs. Does that sound familiar? They call that cultural appropriation nowadays. Saying if they did not remember their people, they would be cursed and their crops would fail. The Sayat kept their promise and have held the ritual of the little black people every year, though they scaled down the ceremonies during the Japanese colonial period. That's when the Japanese colonized China, from 1895 to 1945. Now the ritual is held every 2 years on the 10th full moon of the lunar calendar, with a big festival once every 10 years. At this time, the Sayat are not supposed to fight, and they congregate in their ancestral areas of Miaoli and Hishinchu in the mountains. I've seen it written of as a celebration, but to me it seemed quite a mournful affair, especially in the way music came across, which was trance-like, a haunting kind of chant with a series of 10 to 15 songs, said long-term Taiwan resident Lynn Miles, who has been to the ritual 3 times and will be going again this year. This has been how we've been replaced all over the planet. Forget about the fact that 9/10 of the world is non-white. Stop that nonsense. I don't want to sound disrespectful, but that's not the evidence before us. The whole planet used to be black. That's the point. And that the world is no longer mostly black. Black people of different kinds. And we see how it's been going about historically, and we see what's happening now. But I still haven't made my point that that's what's happening now. Just stay with me. Okay. Now, before I read what I highlighted here, this is what came to me last night. No, what I want to do is I want to show you what William Darity said. So first of all, I'm in this group yesterday and I'm showing, you could see this, I'm showing these people what the Cherokees used to look like. Because I was asked to. Because I said, if we don't have a phenotype requirement, what happened to them is going to happen to us. So they said, oh, show us proof. So I showed them these pictures that you're seeing here. Okay? And then I showed them what they look like now. They said they wanted proof. I showed it to them. Come on. Cherokee Principal Chief John Blake, white man. Cherokee National Tribal Youth Council, white people. He wouldn't accept that. The people I was interacting with in that group, they wouldn't accept that. They said they needed to see a report. Like, okay, so we need a report that, if you pour alcohol in the wound, it hurts. Or, that if you have roses in a tulip garden, the rose doesn't turn into a tulip unless you crossbreed them. These people are just they want to see reports for everything. Most of what we do in our daily lives, we don't need long scientific reports to know that water is wet. They just use it as an obstructionist technique to deny, just basic logic. So I showed them that. Okay? Was there something else in that folder I wanted to show? Oh, I'll show you everybody I have here. Okay. Was there something else from that folder? I know there was. There was. It's very important too. I'm gonna take off the. It's just on this one. That's great. All you ever got to see was the PDF, so I didn't show you the display capture. So let me do that again. Talking, not showing. Go back. I'm going to leave this right here till I get to the display capture that I want to show you. Just give me a second. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 20. Okay, now I'm going to go back to display capture so you can see what I thought I was showing you. So the people in this group wanted to, see the proof of what happened to the Cherokees because I offered them as an example of what was going to happen to us without a phenotype requirement. And so I showed them what the Cherokees used to look like. This is what I thought I was showing you before, but I wasn't. See how they used to look. And then I showed them what they look like today. Cherokee Principal Chief Bill John Blake, white man. Cherokee National Tribal Youth Council, white people. And I'm not going to repeat what I said about them being obstructionists, wanting to see reports. They wanted to see reports on what the criteria was for admission into their tribe. What does that have to do with not having a phenotype requirement? They're just being obstructionists. Okay. So that's what I thought I'd shown you, but now I have shown you. Okay. Now, I want to show you what Dr. Darity said some years back about phenotype.
Hi, yellow heifer. Tar baby.
Colorism, or bias based on skin tone. The lighter, the better, even within communities of color. Black filmmaker Spike Lee mocked colorism in his 1988 film School Days.
You're just a jigaboo. Trying to find something to do. Well, you're a wannabe. Wanna be better than me.
Research supports Lee's dark vision. The darker your skin, the darker your prospects. A study based on a 10-point skin tone scale found a 17% pay penalty for skin between one extreme and the other. Duke economist William Darity is studying colorism.
Darker skinned black men are confronted with higher levels of discrimination and lower wages in America's labor markets than lighter skinned black men. And that in fact, and this is maybe the most provocative result, is that there's really not a statistically significant difference between labor market outcomes for lighter skinned black males and white males.
Are you happy here, honey? Are you finding what you really want? I'm somebody else. I'm white.
In the
Okay, so that's what Dr. Darity said then. Okay? So he knows. And he and I have had conversations about other reports that have come out. And we understand. He, made it clear to me, and it was something that I easily understood, that skin color is just a proxy for phenotype. It's just one of the characteristics. It's a proxy. So skin color is not on its own going to measure accurately the advantages you get by having a phenotype that is non-black, which could be a darker skinned person with other things that make them not look black. And in fact, we have research, I've shown it on videos on this platform, that the other characteristics are more important even than skin color. They combine to give a composite impression. But that's what Dr. Darity said. And it's based on his own research. You can find it. He's done a study on it. If you ask me for it, email me, I'll send it to you. I've given it to Kofi and any number of people. Okay? But then Dr. Darity did that testimony that you just said. Absolutely no phenotype test. And then he doubled down. I mean, we had these conversations, and in the conversations I was having with the people in the group yesterday, I was saying, well, what about Rachel Dolezal? I mean, I thought it was a joke. Up until this point, and I have not only said it in the group, but I've said it other places on social media. Listen, you cannot allow somebody's self-identification to determine whether or not they're black, because that has nothing to do with how the world treats them. Even Rachel Dolezal can do that, because by now she's claimed it for 10 years. And if she can find one ancestor out of the thousands of ancestors that she had between 1600 and 1865, one ancestor, she can document one, she's in. And people like her, or people who just don't look black, I thought it was a joke. I thought you would see the absurdity of it. Well, hold on to your hats. This is a tweet by Dr. William Sandy Darity. He made it, you look at the bottom, around 9 p.m. on June 23rd, 2019. I asked for this. I wanted proof because I couldn't believe he said it. So I asked for proof of it in the group, and somebody delivered that proof to me. And here it is. It's a screenshot of his tweet. If you're driving, you can't read it, but I suggest that you get somewhere and actually see it for yourself, because I don't want you to think I'm lying. You see a picture of Dr. Darity right there. What does it say? Eligibility for reparations could include Dolezal, who apparently self-identifies as black for a number of years, if she could also establish that she had an enslaved ancestor in the United States. Both conditions should be met, and self-classification is not biological. It's not a joke. You see what happens when you don't have a phenotype requirement. Shown you in Australia. You can see it in Hawaii. You can see it all over the planet. You see what's happening here. When we get to the point where we're okay with people like Rachel Dolezal getting reparations, we are stark raving mad. Except how wily are these people? Because like I said, I don't think Dr. Darity is doing it on purpose. I do wonder about some other people. I think some people don't care if black people are genocided out of this part of the world like they have been all over the planet. They're very happy if their great-grandchildren look like, or the grandchildren look like Grace Jones's. For me, that's a nightmare. But beyond it being a nightmare, we're a very special kind of people. I hate roaches. I hate them. I hate flies. I hate them. I hate birds. But when I looked out I love black people, but I'm just saying, when I looked out my hotel window a few years ago and for 3 days, and I never heard a bird tweet, and I knew the ecology was off. It used to be a time when we hated bees. But it's a very dangerous thing when something goes extinct. And as being a black person, we are really special people. All the creativity out of the sciences, the arts, everything, especially to black American people. In this hemisphere, there's nobody more creative than us in any endeavor. Us going out of getting diluted out and being because genocide just means the eradication of a gene type. There are many routes to do it. You can just, you can put them in gas chambers, or you can go the route that was advocated by Professor Boas and the government officials in Australia. And what is looking like what's happening with ADOS, because they keep saying, we're mulatto people anyway. We're mulatto people anyway. That's what ADOS is. We're mulatto. That's because of the one drop rule. You're including a bunch of people who are not black. So when you look at the population statistics, of course, you're going to see a higher percentage that says, you've got like 30% black ancestry. But that's because you're letting people self-identify as black and then taking their blood samples and their DNA samples. And the person who's heading this thing, I've been trying to be diplomatic, but she's not black, so she's okay with it. She's great with it, just like Adam Clayton Powell was in the 1960s. Just like Benjamin Jealous. All along, we've had these non-black people shepherding our public policy, telling us that we should go for desegregation, when that's not what we wanted to start with. Now, I showed that in an earlier video. I just can't keep saying the same thing over and over again. That's not what we wanted. But these one-droppers, they kept saying, "Oh yeah, let's try to integrate," because they weren't really getting treated badly. That they just wanted the formality to go away. They knew that in reality they didn't have our lives. These people don't have our best interest at heart. They got a whole different situation. In the main, I know there are allies. I'm not against the allies. The allies should know what we're talking about here. I can't believe this. I almost don't want to take it off. It's hard for me to talk because my jaw is dropping. Go back to PDF and make sure I haven't left off anything that I wanted to say. Oh, listen, this conversation that I had with Dr. Darity, I'm gonna talk about what's on the screen here in a second. Just give me a second. So when I had this email exchange with Dr. Darity, his primary objection, it seemed to me, was one of the primary objections, and maybe what it was is basically because it won't work, because it didn't work in Brazil. Again, I covered that on a previous video. Brazil's problem was their execution. They didn't have a rubric. It wasn't crisp enough, but we have one. Necessity is the mother of invention. So we have one now. I created one. It's a rubric. It's called the CREE tool. We can measure it. They didn't have that. We have it. But the black people in Brazil wanted it because they knew they needed it, because they knew what happened, what is happening here, what happened there. They knew that the black people would be left out. But they just didn't have the tool. And the same thing's going to happen in Southern Africa and South Africa. But we have a tool. And Dr. Darity's objection to phenotype being required, so he said, I really think it's just that he's tired of laboring in the desert without being put on. He got put on, and he doesn't want to give that up. He got broken by the system. That's what I really think his motivation is. I don't think his motivation is he wants to see genocide. I just think that he's in his early 60s to mid 60s and he wants some credit for his incredible rigorous work. That's what I think. I could be incorrect, but that's what I think. Okay? But what he said was that it didn't work in Brazil, and then he gave an example that there are twins or siblings who have different racial classifications, even twins. Now, not all twins. If you've got identical twins who are coming out with two different classifications, there's something wrong with the way that there's something wrong with your metric. That wouldn't happen on our metric. That wouldn't happen. What they had was much more subjective on their panels, so it didn't work. But he even just had an objection to it just because siblings would be of different classifications, and therefore some siblings would qualify for reparations and others would not. Oh, that's a sad story. I guess it's unfortunate, but that's no reason not to have it. If you've got one sibling who leads the black life and one sibling that doesn't, one sibling needs reparations and the other does not. Just like you might have one sibling get in a car crash. One sibling might need crutches or a wheelchair for a while or special medical care. The other sibling does not. One sibling was born with an astigmatism and needs glasses. The other does not. Siblings don't have to have the same needs. One sibling's going to live a non-black life. One sibling's not. So you have to treat them differently. Parents know that treating children well and treating children justly doesn't mean giving them the exact same thing. Different children need different things. That one sibling would get reparations and one would not is not a reason not to have reparations, not to use phenotype, because we get treated by how we look. But you people who just all you can see is the end of your nose and what you're going to get, what your children are going to get. You unprincipled people. Or some of you are just so... There are pink European people who I think have more principle than some of these mixed breed people. And I don't know about those of you who are unambiguously black who don't care about phenotype. Your brain is so trashed. You've become a liability. Now, it came to me last night. Not only that this was probably this ADOS movement and their embracing of anybody who can just prove one ancestor and is identified as black for 10 years, which in the second generation, that's going to be all people who don't look black. That came to me. But something else came to me. So that even if we were able to get a critical number of people to understand the critical importance of phenotype, we would still have a problem. We will still have a problem. And that problem is that the 14th Amendment, which was supposed to be for us, as constructed by the radical Republicans right after the Civil War, but has been misused to give everybody the things that were meant for us. Even Yvette pointed this out on her program, has been used for immigrants, especially those who are of Hispanic origin coming over the Mexican border. It's been used to allow them to have anchor babies. You know, because the 14th Amendment says that if you were born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. So they walk over here, have a baby. They've been misusing it. But it was meant for us because it was people who were born in these borders, but we were enslaved. And so this amendment, the 14th Amendment, was to say, well, but they were born here and now they're U.S. citizens, and every state has to treat Native Black Americans who were enslaved as U.S. citizens and afford them all the protections of all other people that you in your state. That's what it was meant for. But it's been misused against us so that the things that were set aside for us were given to other people. But see, now even with this ADOS movement, it's going to be used against us. You want to know why? Because if you get a critical number of people who say no phenotype as measured, you know, in a measurable way, which the CREE tool does, if you get a critical number of people to sign on to that, we're still doomed. Why? Because of the 14th Amendment. Because the 14th Amendment has been ruled by the Supreme Court of the United States to prohibit any kinds of wills or inheritances that are set aside for a particular phenotype or race. Before, it was to say, you know, that you white people can't use what was called racial covenants. I thought I had one about racial covenants. Or yeah, it's right here. So they were called racial covenants, and so what was written into the deeds were provisions that said you can't sell this real estate to people who aren't white, but principally black people. That went on for a very long time. And the Supreme Court upheld it at one point, and then it reversed itself and said, no, that's a violation of the 14th Amendment that says that everybody's supposed to have equal protections of the laws. So you can't have racial covenants. So if we tried to do that, if we tried to say, well, okay, fine, marry who you want to marry. But if you have children who are not phenotypically black, they don't get any reparations. So that we can avoid this genocide. We won't be able to do that because of the 14th reparations. So I'll just read you this. Shelley versus Kramer. I always mean to show what the document is, so I will do that first and then scroll down to this yellow part. This is a document called Racially Restrictive Covenants in the United States, a call to action. You see it long enough to where you should be able to Google it for yourself. I don't have the website for you. Now, to the applicable part. That I highlighted. Here it is. Shelley versus Kramer. In 1948, the Supreme Court revisited and overturned. Remember I said they overturned it. They overturned racial covenants as being consistent with the 14th Amendment. In 1948, the Supreme Court revisited and overturned Corrigan versus Buckley, dismissing the arguments of both defendants that racially restricted covenants were private agreements not subject to the 14th Amendment, and plaintiffs that the freedom to purchase and use property regardless of race or color was a fundamental and basic freedom that was protected by the Constitution. In Shelley v. Kramer and its companion cases, the court held that judicial enforcement of racially restrictive covenants constituted discriminatory governmental action in violation of the Constitution. The court concluded that the state may not accomplish indirectly through the courts what it cannot constitutionally do directly through the legislature. In other words, if we were to say only phenotypically black people may inherit whatever wealth we have as a result of reparations, that will be held unconstitutional. Absolutely. The only way around that is if we get something similar to the sovereignty that the currently recognized Native Americans have, where we have our own jurisdiction. Juris means judgment, diction meaning say. In law, the Moors like to talk about this. If you have sovereign people, sovereign groups have their own jurisdiction. So we can't pronounce, for instance, people in the United States do not have jurisdiction over anything that happens in France. They might go to war, but they don't have legal jurisdiction. There are diplomats that the United States courts or any state court has no jurisdiction over if they're from some other place. It's a treaty. You have to have legal jurisdiction. In other words, you have to have the right to hold people to your laws. So Native Americans have their own jurisdictions. They have their own laws. So I looked into it to say, well, I think that's what we have to have our own, because if we have to go by the 14th Amendment, we won't be able to save ourselves. We have to be able to pronounce who is a member of our group. We've got to have sovereignty. We've got to have something similar to what the Native Americans have. So that's what this next PDF says. It's talking about tribal sovereignty. So I looked into it to see, well, are Native Americans, do they get to say who's in and who's out? Do they have the ability to pronounce that? Do they get to fall outside of the 14th Amendment for that? So I highlighted this. Again, the document. You do know that in Google, all you have to do is just take the very same words, type them in. If you type in enough of them, you'll get the same document. But just so you can see the title of it. American Indian and Alaska Native Genetics Resource Center. So they're talking about genetics, but that's not the part I want to talk about. So tribal sovereignty, which is what we ought to be looking for, because if we don't, we're not going to be able. We're going to be genocided out by this reparations ADOS movement. So tribal sovereignty, starting right here where my cursor is. Make sure you can see it. Yeah, you can. Now, where are we? Okay. Tribes have the inherent and sovereign right to determine their own membership using their own criteria. That first sentence, I about got up and did the dance of joy. That's what we should be pushing for. If you are sincere, this is what you should be pushing for. And what's also wonderful about that is that Native Americans don't give up their citizenship in the United States. So if they do something outside of their own land, then yes, they're United States citizens and they're held to United States law and the laws of whatever state. But on their own land, they're not subject to it. So you get to have both. You have dual citizenship, which is definitely something we should have, given that we helped build this nation, but also that we need it in order to not be genocided out. Okay. So yeah, that first sentence is probably enough, but I'll finish reading the rest of what I highlighted. This right enables tribes to consider whether DNA testing, we don't care about DNA testing, is an appropriate tool for determining tribal enrollment. I hate to have to repeat this over and over again, but DNA testing is not an accurate way to determine individual ancestry. It is good for large population groups. I've discussed why. I'm not going to go into that again. I consider the people who come by this venue to be really smart people, curious people, and very, very capable of rudimentary research. Okay, so I'm going to just go on. The ability to determine tribal membership criteria is a right held by all indigenous people throughout the world. We are indigenous. Now you begin to see how important it is for us to claim to prove and to claim our indigenous rights here. But even if we don't, we just have the right to do it because of what you've done to us and what you know is going to happen to us if we don't get our own land and we can't determine who's a member of us based on phenotype. The United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People puts forward this as a principle. stating specifically in Article 33 that indigenous people have the right to determine their own identity or membership in accordance with their customs and traditions. This does not impair the right of indigenous individuals to obtain citizenship of the states in which they live. I did a whole video on this, right? Well, it wasn't one of the most popular ones, but it's one of the more important ones. It's entitled, I'll show it. I'll go to screencast so you can see it. Like, I feel like I'm spoon feeding, but you do what you got to do. I guess I'm going to make this part easy for y'all. I want to show you which video it is. It is, like some of you are like, you don't have to do that. Stop spoon feeding us. It's this one right here. Descendant of slavery or actual Native American. Okay. We may have to make recourse to that. I hope we don't. I would rather that we make our case just based on what will happen in terms of genocide if we don't have our own sovereign lands, and at the same time retain citizenship in the United States. A lot of people are saying, well, let's get the reparations first. Let's stop all this bickering. Do you think that the Jews and the Japanese bickered like this? How do you think that they got reparations with all that kind? If they bickered the way we did, they didn't bicker. Do your research. What you will find out is there was all kinds of disagreement, public disagreement between Jews of the world in terms of the establishment of the state of Israel and about reparations. Same thing with the Japanese Americans that were, descendants of or were interned in the camps during World War II. There's disagreement because people want to get things right, and everything is in definitions. What's a black person? That's a crucial definition. What is the lineage thing that these Addos people are talking about? That's a crucial definition. 90% of the time, if you're not going to actual physical stuff, the battles are won and lost in the definitions. You just find out about it maybe 10, 20, 100 years later, but you already lost the battle if you lost the battle in the definition. So if we aren't able to win this battle on the definition of a black person on phenotype, we have lost. We are going to be genocided out. And I would like to say I've done my duty, and I'm, in a couple, 3 months, I'm retiring, and I'm leaving this in capable hands. Right now I know about 3 or 4 people who they have to carry the torch. I have my Kango boots. Try to get in them as often as possible. Try to limit my carbs. Try to get good sleep, which is difficult for me. Because I'm trying to keep my health and my energy as long as I can so that I can be relevant, because I don't see enough younger people ready to do it. But I'm not, I would like recognition for the work that I've done, but I'm not principally powered by that desire for fame or anything like that. So, I want to enjoy the years that I have left. I want to travel and do fun stuff. I want to travel and keep myself looking attractive so I can have fun with, the opposite sex. And all the kind of stuff I like to do. That's what I'd like to spend most of my time doing. Dr. Welsing, she died of a stroke in her 70s. I don't want that to be me. God. Okay, I don't want to end this on a sad thing. I'm trying to recruit you young people to doing what's necessary. But no, they're not joking. They think Rachel Dolezal and people like that should get reparations. And we're going to be out of here. Now, if that happens. So, that's it. That's all I got for this week. I'll be back next Saturday, if the ancestors say the same. Another day is not promised. I like life. Had a good one despite everything. I'm not ready for it to be done. But I don't want that grandchild. I've made it very clear. Now, I know some of you know some things about my daughter, but yeah, she could, produce a grandchild for me. I would have to be a little bit more hands-on. But I've made it clear since she was 12 years old, I don't want a white grandchild. I made that clear, and unfortunately I made I don't know if I made the choice that was available to me at the time. But I've nixed all kinds of boyfriends that I thought, because I don't want it developing into anything serious. Now I have a little bit of leverage because she'll need my help. But I've made it very clear, I don't want that grandchild. I'm proud. I'm happy with. I think there's something very special in our bloodline, and I'd like to retain it. And I certainly don't want our people genocidal out. Okay, so maybe you heard doors slamming and so on. Her and her current beau of the last almost year, been in and out of the house, going various places together. I'm on board with that. Maybe I'll get a grandchild, and it'll be, our kind. I don't know if, hey, YouTube, I'm not saying I'm a black supremacist. I'm saying, just like you white folks don't want the extinction of rhinos and all kinds of creatures on this planet. You don't want extinction of our kind, right? So I'm on your side. That's all this is. Don't block my video. Okay? So this has been the Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer program for Saturday, July 20th, 2019. Until we speak next, stay safe and stay healthy. Signing out.